I usually start off my interviews very differently now from the last time that we
Okay.
spoke.
Okay.
So instead of me gushing about who you are, what you do, I'm going
Right.
to turn it on to you now, my friend, and
Sure.
say, Dr. Russ Kennedy, what is it that you do? Who are you? And why do you do it?
Sure. Are we doing that right now?
Go for it, my friend.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Russell Kennedy. I'm a medical doctor and clinical neuroscientist who suffered with anxiety, crippling anxiety, almost suicidal anxiety for many, many years. My father was bipolar and schizophrenic, and I think that's where it all started. And I tried every therapy, every type of cognitive therapy, CBT, ACT, HIJK, LMNP, every therapy you can name, I pretty much did, and it didn't really help me. So I went into psychedelics. I took some LSD, and LSD showed me that my anxiety that I thought was in my mind was actually an old state of alarm, physiological alarm that was stuck in my body. And from that point on, I kind of thought, okay, well, maybe this alarm is the younger version of me, who had to suffer through my dad's schizophrenia and eventual suicide and stuff. And that really started me down a different path of trying to heal anxiety using the body as opposed to the mind. We have to use the mind as well, of course, but just localizing it in your body. And this is where people write me all the time that I never really thought of my anxiety being in my body. I always thought it was my anxious thoughts, and I was trying to change my thoughts, and nothing really helped. And then I wrote my first book, Anxiety RX, that came out in 2020. And then the second version of it is coming out in September of 2024. So I had a chance to revise that and really make it a lot more practical. The first version was basically my life story with anxiety and how I finally overcame it and what allowed me to do that. So I was able to sort of parse that out and then show other people how to do that. So I got my Instagram channel and that kind of thing. And it's really been showing people that they actually have the agency to heal their own anxiety. It's not coming from a doctor or a supplement or, anything like that. It's basically connecting your adult self to your child self and connecting your mind to your body. Because ultimately, anxiety is a disconnection of your adult self to your child self and a disconnection from your mind and your body. Once you can pull those things together, then you can start really healing instead of just coping. So that's me, Jay.
That's you indeed. And for those people that are wondering, Dr. Russ and I connected quite a long time ago now. It seems like a long time ago. And the message all the way back then was incredibly vital. I think it's even more vital today. And that's why I'm grateful for his time. And I'm grateful for the fact that he's releasing the updated version of Anxiety RX because I know that it's going to help a lot of people. Why, in your experience and over the years, why is this such an important message that you want to get out?
Well, anxiety is it's the fastest growing condition in the world now.
Why is
So
that?
I think that there's so much uncertainty in the world. I think anxiety really breeds from uncertainty, typically in childhood, not always, but mostly it's an uncertainty that was too much for us to bear in childhood. With me, it was my dad. A lot of people have different traumas in childhood. And I think it just sets the stage and the neurochemistry, the chemistry in our brains and our bodies to develop an attitude of protection rather than an attitude of growth, right? So we're always in this protective mode, like we always make sure that we're protected instead of growing. And the worst part about that is to grow, you have to go outside of your protection mode. But what anxiety does, it turns you into a victim where you don't actually expand into growth. You just sort of retreat into protection all the time. And it becomes a habit. And the more you believe you need protection, the more you're going to believe you need protection. And it just becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy that the world, yes, the world is a challenging place without a doubt. But if you tell yourself consciously and unconsciously that it's a challenging place and that you're in trouble and that you're constantly in danger, your body's going to feel that. And there's no real way of getting out of that until you really realize, okay, how do I take control of this? How do I not become a victim anymore? How do I learn how to receive? Even receiving a hug. Like, are you the first person when you get a hug from, a family member or someone you love? Are you the first person to let go? What I call defensive detachment. Do you detach from human connection because as it was for me, human connection with my dad was dangerous when I was younger. Like he was never abusive or violent, but I just couldn't trust him as he got more and more sick with schizophrenia. So I learned that love wasn't trustable because of my dad, because he was playful and loving and caring and great a lot of the time, but then he would also be horribly depressed or psychotic. So I learned it's not safe to love because that love is going to get taken away from you. So it really comes down to, do you see life through the eyes of protection or through growth?
Do we know what age anxiety starts to seep in and the chemicals start changing?
Can be even before you're born. Like
Wow.
there's a lot of people that I see, well, maybe not a lot, but there's people that I see that have relatively normal childhoods, but they've inherited their family trauma from their grandparents, from their parents, because they had horribly stressful, traumatic lives. And we're seeing more and more in cell biology, and just science in general that trauma can be handed down through generations. So there really isn't a specific age. You can get it prenatally, you can get it in the womb. If your mother's horribly stressed carrying you, that can be a predisposition for anxiety. I think what happens a lot is that we're just born sensitive. We're just born sensitive people. And I think that happens almost at random, because I see parents and they have two kids. They say, one of my kids is just like, whatever, happy go lucky. And the other one is just really like
Tense.
scared and wired. And I think we're just born, and there is some genetic explanation for that, in that our temperament seems to be almost genetically wired. So our sensitivity is almost genetically wired. And if you are born very sensitive in a caring, loving, nurturing home, you're fine. But if you're born very sensitive and your parent, has an alcohol use disorder, or is abusive or violent or whatever, that can really set the stage to create this protective mindset that creates this neurophysiology of protection all the time, where we start thinking that everything is something that we need to be protected from. And that is when anxiety really gets a hold of us.
So it's interesting that you say that. So you've got one child in the, if we say that
Mhm.
anxiety can develop from past trauma, you've got the first child, they're born and they become incredibly anxious later on. And then we've got the second child that is born not long later, but they're totally fine. They don't have to deal
Yeah.
with much anxiety one bit. So I guess the question is, if we've got the mother that has dealt with a great deal of trauma from her past, why is it that it goes to one child but not both of them?
Yeah, nobody really knows, right?
Huh.
Sometimes it goes to both. Like if you
Yeah.
if you have a mother who is addicted to cocaine or whatever, often that will transmit into all of her offspring. But it's really curious, because I was a family doctor for 20 plus years.
Mm.
And I would see these families where, they had three kids, and two of the kids were, kind of whatever. And one of the kids was just driven, just, and not autistic, not neurodivergent, just driven to do something. And same parents, same parenting. I knew their parents too because I was their doctor. And it was just really curious. It's almost you know, like the fairy comes down and blesses a certain person, and blesses a sort of a loaded word there. With some of the kids are just really, really sensitive. And like I said, if you grow up in an environment where there's care and love and being connected, yeah, you'll be fine. But if you grow up and there's trauma, if you're sensitive, the chances of you going into anxiety, depression, eating disorders, personality disorders, OCD goes up markedly.
Oh yeah, which is pretty much the course of my life. So
Yeah, there you
I had
go. You
a
had a lot of stresses.
lot of
You had a lot of
stresses, man.
stresses.
Growing up, I went through quite a bit, which then led into
Medical trauma, all that stuff.
medical, yeah, all that fun stuff. I mean, you've read my book, so
I have. I
quite a
have.
bit that I've been through. So it is the age that I am now. So I'm 28 next week. The older I get, the more I start to realize it all starts to make sense a lot more. And I'm
Right.
going, okay, well, yes, I've been through all that. Now I'm at the age at the moment, I don't want it to continue. I don't want it to be passed down to my future kids. So now I'm going to deal with it
Right.
and make damn well sure that my future kids don't have to deal with like passed down trauma. So I'm doing incredibly hard work, so to speak, on myself so that I'm not passing down the anxious gene or more trauma to my future kids, which I think it's not an easy thing to do, but
No.
I think it's a beneficial thing to do. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's breaking the mold. There's usually a change maker in the family, and that change maker can get a lot of pushback because
Yeah.
there is a lot of familiarity in doing things as a family the way you've always done them. So if there's someone starting to say, hey, what did happen with Uncle Jeff? Like, why, we said he just died suddenly, but now I hear he's been in prison for the last 20. Like, there's these weird stories that I hear about all the time, is that how families kind of suppress different aspects of themselves. And it shows up one way or another. It's like whack-a-mole. You can push it down somewhere, but it's going to come up somewhere else. And
Mm,
I think there's a lot of, I think in families, in our genetics, I think there's almost like there's a role that that family is going to play in the world. And, you know, I always have this thing about free will, like how much free will do we actually have? The older I get, the more I see that I was programmed to do this work. I was programmed to become a doctor. I could have done something else, but I mean, I think there's just grooves that get put into us at a young age. And I think that we just sort of follow them unconsciously.
yeah.
And some of us are wounded healers, and that's just we're almost minted that way.
It's strange, isn't it? Because like growing up, I wanted to be a filmmaker. And then everything I did revolved around film. I lived and breathed it. Like film is not going to ever go away. It's always going to be
Right.
part of my life. But then life took me on a very different trajectory and
Sure
doing
did.
things that I never thought that I would be doing.
Yeah.
And like you, the older I get, the more I realize maybe yes, it was a conscious choice, but some things I was forced. Like I didn't really
Yeah.
have much of a choice, but I think that was ultimately a good thing because it then led me to what I'm supposed to be doing. And then again, it's like, do you really have one specific thing that you're meant to do for the rest of your life and that's it? Like, or do you have multiple things that you can do? Like you're a neuroscientist, I believe, a medical doctor, family doctor, you're an author, you're all these things.
Yeah.
It's like, did you ever think you'd be that?
I think they're all the same. I think
Yeah.
it's all, I think everything I did, because I used to wonder, like, why the hell am I a professional stand-up comedian and
Yeah,
a
that
yoga
too.
teacher and a medical doctor? And it's like, why? But it's all coming together now because I mean I was a comedian because it allows me to talk to people. I'm able to and able to frame things in a different way. And I think that's what comedians do is they take things that are rather mundane, but they make you look at things in a different way. And it's like, oh, and it's like, why did I see it that way? It's like, well, you needed someone else to do that. So I think, there's a certain amount of wiggle room we have, but it's the old free will argument. It's like, how much of this were you programmed, Jay, to do? And how much of this was I programmed to do? How much do I think it's my free will to write a book or whatever? Maybe it was just programmed into me. And I know this sounds rather nihilistic and stuff, but I think it's, the older I get, the more I see that, yeah, I had a little wiggle room when I look back into doing what I could have become a paramedic or something like that. But it was pretty much destined that I would kind of eventually get to this point. Now, maybe I wouldn't have become as quote unquote successful as I am now, but I'd still be doing this type of thing.
I believe from what I've seen and what I've experienced in my life and what I know to be true, I believe that there is free will. What that looks like may not exactly be what I initially thought it was.
Hmm.
There's just like, I think free will is a rather intriguing concept that I've heard a lot of scientists and a lot of professors talk about and try to explain, and even they struggle to really explain it.
Sure.
It is a fascinating concept, but I'm not sure we can. Well, I don't really want to get into the whole free will
Yeah,
stuff,
it's a bit
but
of a circular argument for
yeah,
sure,
it
but
does go around.
yeah, you can't because again, but just to sort of cap it off, free will is a human construct. Like it's
Yeah,
something that we've developed. Free will. It's It's words that we've created to mean something like, oh, I can do whatever I want kind of thing. But maybe that's not the case. And I think there's a certain amount of pre-programming that we're not even aware of that's in every one of us.
Mm. I think that's a great way to sort of lead into, I guess, the whole line of thought for me is like when we're dealing with childhood trauma, why is it that trauma is, I guess, so trauma comes first and then anxiety comes from that, right?
Yeah, I mean, trauma, I think what happens is that when we're children, typically, not always, it doesn't always occur in childhood, but typically in childhood, we experience a separation that's too much for us to bear. Like our parent dies, our parent gets divorced, we're beaten, we're abused, we're neglected, we're abandoned. Somehow it's just too much for our little minds to bear. And then that energy, because energy can't be created nor destroyed, only changed in form, it gets stuffed down into our body. And I think there's a part of our brain called the insular cortex, which kind of acts as a way station between what we call top down, which is what we think goes into our body, and bottom up, what our body feels goes into our mind. But this insular cortex, I think, imprints this trauma. So it creates a view of the world that, like, as I was saying, is very highly protective.
Mm,
So I think there is a scientific explanation behind this, and I think what happens with the insular cortex, and this is just my theory, is that it's almost impossible to prove this, but I think when we go through a certain trauma, part of us gets halted at that age. So part of us stays there. And I think there's an emotional signature of that trauma. So we feel the same way now that we did when we were 8 years old and our mother was screaming at us, or 12 years old and we were in front of the classroom and everyone was laughing at us. We feel the same way in our body now that we did back then. And of course, then when we feel that trauma again come up in us, we may not be aware of where it comes from, we create all these thoughts and all these warnings, what ifs, worst case scenarios that are completely consistent with that alarm feeling that we have on our body from years and years ago. And one of the sayings that I love is that all emotional overreactions, like when you see someone lose their,
yeah.
are age regressions. So when you see somebody like on YouTube or whatever, who's a Karen who's yelling at somebody and losing their mind, they're probably in an age regression. They're probably like 6 years old and they're going back to a time where they were maybe abused or abandoned or whatever. So I think we log these things in unconsciously and then we unconsciously act on them for the rest of our lives unless we become aware of them as you're doing and we start to consciously try to change that step in the dance.
When you have someone that is, say, yelling and screaming at another person that is trying
Yeah.
to explain something to them,
Hmm.
that is more a case of them like being detached from their former, their child self, and they're extremely anxious and worried. And it's not necessarily like they're believing in lies or anything.
No. I mean, I think what happens too is that even when we get in a fight in our relationship, like Cynthia and I have a picture of each other when we're about 8 years old. So she has a picture of me when I'm 8, I have a picture of her when she's 8. And when we argue or whatever, I go down and I look at that picture and it's like, well, this is who I'm arguing with. And when I see this little girl, it's like, why am I getting so upset at this little girl? Because that's what she's turned into. That's what I've turned into as well. And it is so much easier to be compassionate to the other person when you don't see them as this sort of adult persecutory figure. You
Yeah.
see them as like where they really are. Like they are freaked out. They're a freaked out 8-year-old. And when you see your partner that way, it's so much easier to kind of come back and connect.
Because it's so difficult to try and reason with a person that is acting like a little child. It's almost like you're going back to when you were a child. You didn't want to listen to anyone that's telling you off
Yeah.
for having a tantrum, so to speak. So, like, how do you navigate those sort of waters if you got someone yelling and screaming at you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you regulate yourself,
Yeah.
basically. I'm a big fan of finding the alarm in your system. My programs, I have an online program called MBRX, your mind body program for permanent anxiety healing. and it has two meditations in it. And one of the meditations is taking you back into that old trauma and finding where it is in your body. Because when you find out where it is, like for me, it's in my solar plexus, and I write about that extensively in the first book and in the second book too. It's like when I put my hand over that area that I feel the alarm, instantly I feel better. And then adding some breath into that, adding, feeling your feet on the ground, relaxing your shoulders, relaxing your jaw, just putting yourself into this physiological state of maybe not relaxation, but at least more peace.
Mm.
Because what happens when we're in survival physiology is we secrete norepinephrine, noradrenaline in the brain, epinephrine in the body, cortisol in the body, and it creates this survival response. And evolutionarily, that survival response shuts off our rational brain because 60,000 years ago, when we were being chased by a warring tribe or whatever, we didn't need our intellect so much as we needed the emotion to get us the hell out of there. So we got Stone Age brains in digital world, so we're still acting the same way now that we would have back then. So it's really how can I bring my rational mind back, which is basically regulating your body. Because once you regulate your body, the rational brain comes back online. And when the rational brain comes back online, you can see things that you previously couldn't. So it's really about being aware and being aware of when you're heading into it too. This is what I talk about too, about it's like when you're on the roller coaster and you're going up and it's going up, like on some level you have some kind of control as to what's going on. I mean, you're locked in there. But as soon as that thing crests the hill, it's too late. Like
Yeah.
it's just too late. And the other analogy that I draw is like if you're going down a super highway into anxiety town, and you see that you're on the highway, you can take an exit off that highway when you see it. But if you don't see it because your rational mind has been shut off, you're just going to keep driving straight into that place, and the chances of you being able to avoid it are very, very low. So it's really all about early awareness and then making the choice to do something different. But if you're so worked up, you often don't even see the choice because your rational mind has been shut off.
Or as the roller coaster is going up, you can try as best you can to breathe. You're waiting for that drop.
Yeah,
You don't know exactly when the drop is going to happen, but you're waiting
yeah.
for it. So there's a little bit of anxiety creeping up into you. It's the anxious thought of when is this going to drop? I know what it's going to do to my body.
Yep.
So when it drops and you haven't been focused on your breath and you're going, crap. All
Yeah,
that,
and typically a
yeah,
lot of the anxiety, once you crest the hill and start going down, typically a lot of the anxiety will turn into excitement.
yeah.
It's like the worst part of anxiety is the anticipation and the fact that you have created these painted tigers. There's this old proverb about the man who, paints a tiger on the cave wall that's so realistic that he scares himself to death. And I say that like our worries are our own painted tigers. We've done this to ourselves. So if you can step back and you kind of see that this is my own painted tiger, but you have to do that with enough anticipation, with enough warning that you can actually change course. Because once you're in it, it's very hard to get out of.
What's the difference between anxiety and nervousness, or is that the same thing?
Anxiety, excitement. I've heard that before. Like the difference between anxiety and excitement is they say it's the same thing. No, it's not. It's not the same thing. There's very similar things that happen in your body, but anxiety creates all this negative self-talk in there, all this sort of warnings, what ifs, worst case scenarios. Whereas excitement is it's much more benevolent. So it doesn't create exactly the same. It's very similar, but it doesn't create the exact same thing. So anxiety has a whole lot of negative, fearful talk involved with it, whereas excitement is kind of like, this is kind of really cool. I'm uncertain, but I'm okay with the uncertainty. Whereas with anxiety, you're uncertain, but you hate the uncertainty.
Yeah. Can you have both at the same time?
Yeah, I think so. I think
Yeah.
so. I mean, it really depends on where you allow your mind to go, which is what we were kind of just talking about. So if you let your mind go into, I've got this horrible tax bill. I'm never going to be able to pay for it. I've just, wrecked my car. If you go into all this negative self-talk, it's just going to build on itself. Like whatever you focus on, you get more of that. So it's a matter of, okay, how can I be the kindest, gentlest version to myself while I'm heading into anxiety? because there's a lot of victim mentality in anxiety, and victim mentality isn't very compassionate or empathetic towards us. In fact, it's very punitive.
How about fear?
Fear and anxiety are different. Fear is you're walk out on the street and there's a bus bearing down on you and it's going to hit you. That's fear. Now, if you're inside the house and you say, "Oh, geez, I hope I don't get hit by a bus today," that's anxiety. So the difference between the two is fear, you can't wait. You have
Yeah.
to do something about right away. Anxiety, the hallmark of anxiety is that you can wait. There's no urgency to it.
So if I'm afraid of something, I'm being impatient. I want it to be over and done with. Anxiousness, I'm just sitting there mulling over, stewing over all the negativity and making it worse myself.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we make our own painted tigers for
Yeah.
sure, and we believe them because we made them up. And usually, we make the fears that scare us the most. Some people aren't afraid of death at all. Like it's just, they just don't have a fear of death. Other people with a strong fear of death, that's where they'll go to when they're feeling anxious. It's like, oh my God, I could die. Whereas other people that don't have that fear of death don't fall down that groove. We all have our frequent flyer worries, the ones that we kind of go to over and over and over again.
I mean, death is not something that I think about on a regular basis, but sometimes I get those strange thoughts, strange moments of, oh, I'm mortal. I'm gonna die one day.
Yeah,
Then I go, well, crap. Like, what's that gonna look like?
yeah.
Like
And you
the
don't know.
reality. You don't know.
And you don't know. And that's a big thing about anxiety is that your brain will start filling in the details. Oh, am I going to fall off a cliff? Am I going to get hit by a bus? Like it's all the stuff that your brain is doing that have no real good reason to do. But it makes sense, like we were talking about before. It makes sense when your body feels physiologically in danger or in survival. Your mind is not going to start making up stories about cookies and picnics and puppies. Your mind is a meaning making, make sense machine. So if you have a lot of alarm in your system, your mind is going to make up alarming thoughts to be completely consistent with that alarm feeling in your body. There's this process called interoception, which is where your mind is constantly reading your body. So if all of a sudden your body feels really, really scared and anxious, your mind will compulsively and automatically give you scary, anxious thoughts. It's just the way that we're wired. So what I say is, can you see this happening? Can you see, my God, my body feels really alarmed. I know that my mind is going to start telling me all these horrible warnings, what is worst case scenarios. And if I can be curious about those thoughts rather than believe them as true just because I made them, just because I painted these tigers, then we have a chance of changing that outcome. But if we just unconsciously fall into the whole believing the stories that we're telling ourselves, it's just going to cycle and it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And typically that's what happens. It just gets worse and worse and worse, anxiety, as we get older.
Is the anxiety different for the sexes, like male and female, or is it affect equally?
It's a good question. I think men in general blunt their emotions a lot more
Yeah.
than women.
We create
So
masks.
women are likely to label, "Oh, I'm having anxiety." Whereas men are maybe likely to feel more aggressive or more frustrated. They have very little tolerance for frustration, road rage, this kind of stuff.
Ha!
And really, the root cause of that is cultural.
Yeah.
So it's more acceptable for a woman to say, "I'm feeling anxious," than it is for a man because it implies weakness for a man.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Road rage for me is definitely an issue,
Yeah, I
especially
think it is
with
for a lot of
slow
people. I think it is for a
drovers.
lot of people.
Yeah.
I think and again, it's that energy in your body that's frustrating. And you see this person in front of you or this car in front of you that it makes perfect sense. Why wouldn't I just let it out on this person? But you don't realize that basically it's coming from inside of you. And the little thing that I say is if someone cuts you off in traffic, you can yell and scream at them and raise your blood pressure and do all this sort of stuff, or you can just, take some physiological sighs and breathe in. But here's what makes my little point different. If you say, I have two choices here, I can relax, I can breathe, or I can yell at this person. and then you yell at the person, I have no problem with that because you actually made a conscious decision to yell. It wasn't just this automatic gainsay, I'm just going to unload on this person. If you choose to do it, I have no problem with you yelling at the person. But if you just do it automatically, that can be a little bit more of a problem.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So I
Yeah.
I choose all the time
Yeah.
to get mad, even though the person I'm yelling at can't hear me. But
Yeah.
it's more for me trying to
Yeah.
help my frustration. Just
I I think
yeah.
there is a discharge. I think there is a discharge. Like I have this process that I take people through, especially men, when they can't access their emotions. Like I have this guy who's going through divorce and he just can't seem to get out of his head. Like he like why is she doing this? Like I give her everything, you know, why is she doing this? And so I said, okay, well here's what you do is you go to the car, you get in the car, you go to a sort of a remote area and you just start screaming in the car,
Mm,
just screaming, right? Scream your frustrations out. And about 80% of the time, that will bring a man to tears. Like the frustration is what brings him to tears. He can't access tears directly because of the cultural influence, but when you come through frustration, often you can get to your tears. And the thing about tears is they're an adaptive process. So when you have a lot of tears, when you cry, when you allow yourself to cry because your dog is dead, or you know you've got a divorce, or whatever it is, the external things haven't changed. You're still divorced, your dog is still dead, but your internal perception of that event changes because the tears change your neurohormonal and neurochemical structure in your brain, so it doesn't seem so bad.
mm. When we say
So
culture,
we're taking that away from men.
yeah.
So no wonder men kill themselves at 4 times the rate that women do because we're taking this adaptation process of tears away from them from the time they're 2 or 3 years old.
And when we say the cultural elements, are we talking about more Western ideology, more Western teachings of
It's
men need to
it's a
subdue themselves and
It's a
all
good
that?
question, Jay. I don't know, like in Asian cultures, or in Indian cultures, how crying in boys is looked at.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting question. I've never really thought of it. My sense is it's probably the same. It's probably girls are allowed to cry, boys don't cry, and that gets culturally put into us from the time we're like 2 or 3 years old. And when we do that, we take away a real powerful adaptive strategy from men. And, you know, of course, men will become aggressive, violent, whatever it is after that, because you've taken away a very potent way of discharging energy from them.
But it's very much like Australian men, especially.
Yep.
It's, you know, toughen up. I grew
Yeah.
up with that mentality and I saw, you know, men don't cry. It's just,
Yep.
it's a sign of weakness. You don't want to see women like getting, or you don't want women to see you crying essentially because
Yeah.
that women want a tough son of a bitch, you know, that they want someone that is able to look after them, take care of them, and showing any sort of emotion like crying is not a positive somehow. But
I think
messaging
that's true.
now, it's changed, I guess, or it is changing. It should
It
change.
is changing, but I mean, I do think unconsciously women do not want to see men cry.
Yes.
I don't think so. That's why I say go car screaming, like go
Yeah.
cry on your own. Because
Don't
I
in
mean, I
front of the
think
girl.
you could probably get away with a couple of cries in front of your girl. And like, this has changed in me. Like before I was like, no, women want an emotionally sensitive man and stuff like that. And the more I'm looking at the literature and the more I'm seeing what's happening, it's like, no, they really don't. Like you
Yeah.
can cry intermittently, you know, but it's not something they want to see on a regular basis because it does, from an evolutionary standpoint, it does make them feel unsafe
Yeah.
because, you know, and yeah, I used to do this joke about, you know, you don't, men have to go out and kill the meat. Like that's just how it is, right? So you don't want the man to be like, oh, the poor pig. I didn't feel like I threw a spear. I killed the poor pig. You know, like we don't want that. We can't have that and have a functioning society.
Yeah.
Maybe now because we're not sort of killing pigs for, you know, out in the wilderness for food anymore. But it's in us. It's in our evolutionary structure. So yeah, cry, but cry, you know, go car screaming, like get it out. but you don't have to do it in front of your female.
Yeah.
And Brene Brown talks about that too. She says, I had this man come up to me. He says, I have a wife and 3 or 4 daughters. I can't remember. She said, and he was getting her to sign her books and say, my girls would rather see me die on that white horse than actually admit any weakness. And I think that's true. I think that's very true in society. We like to think that we're all, evolved and, men can cry and all that kind of stuff, but I think we're still animals. And I think it's still disturbing for women or, even society in general to see men cry. And that's why boys are, told not to cry.
There's a guy I follow on Instagram, Alima Omega. I'm not sure if you have seen any of
No, I
his.
don't know. Yeah.
He's hilarious. So there's a video that was circulating over on TikTok. TikTok, the bane of everybody's existence. We'll get into that later in terms of
Sure.
anxiety. But he had a bunch of men in a room, and they're all hugging each other and all bursting into tears. And then
Yeah.
he does a parody of that with him and his mate.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. And there's another thing. I don't know if you've seen it either, but like there's apparently this retreat the women go on. And if they've got any sort of inbuilt rage, repression that they're holding in, they
Yeah.
unleash it with sticks. They're bashing things. They're yelling and screaming. And he does a parody of that too. Like it's
I've
just,
seen that one. I haven't
it's
seen the man
hilarious.
one. Well, we have a guy, I mean, called Aussie Man. I don't know if you have an Aussie
Yeah.
Man, and he talks about different, this bird who pecks into this power line. It's like, oh shit, I don't, like, I hate that. Oh, this looks interesting. I'll pick on this. And then he falls down on the ground. It's really funny. Aussie Man is great.
The funniest thing though is a lot of that stuff, like that I mentioned, the men in the group
Yeah.
hugging,
Oh yeah.
crying each
Yeah.
other, that
Yeah.
gets so many views. Like,
Yes.
and the comments that I'm reading now, it's amazing to me, Russ. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, we need more men like this. I'm going, but you've also got a lot of women that are watching it, and I don't think any of these dudes are going to find a woman after this. I
Yeah.
personally don't think that because evolutionary psychology dictates otherwise. It's just like how
Yeah.
we're wired. Men,
It really is how we're
yeah,
wired. And I agree. So it's like that's what I say, like get some tears, but find them on your own.
yeah.
If you can. I think that's kind of like the happy medium between the two of them because tears are important. And that's what I mean about like it's so culturally conditioned out of us that that's how like frustration, screaming, hitting something, then the release will come and the tears will come. But just to go from a flat standing to be able to access tears as a male, very, very difficult for a lot of people, for a lot of men.
Has anxiety changed from when, we're running from the lion, the saber-toothed tiger, to now we've got social media age?
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. I think a lot of anxiety is the story that we tell ourselves. And the stories are so much more insidious and so much more damaging than they used to be. It used to be in the 60s or 70s, like, I have low self-esteem. And now it's like, I'm fat, my lips are too big, my eyes are too close together. Like it's just another level of internal navel gazing. And it's just killing us. Like
Mm.
and it's crushing the women more than the men, I think, in general. But still, we suffer from it as men. Like there's a great saying about social media is like, don't compare your inside life to their outside life.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the body positivity movement? Having spoken about like the mirror stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to develop a healthy, compassionate connection with yourself. Jordan Peterson talks about that too, about, you
Mm.
know, allowing someone who's, you know, BMI over 35, like very unhealthy, right? And having that as like, oh, this is okay. We should accept this in the culture. And it's like, yeah, there's a fine line between accepting it and helping people kind of become more healthy and just allowing it to be there. It's like, body shaming or whatever it is. I mean, there's a reason why shame exists. and it basically is to curb behavior. That's why shame exists in the first place. Now, I'm not saying that we should shame people who are overweight because sometimes they just can't help it, like
Yeah.
period. It's just the way their bodies are just hyper efficient at taking every single calorie out of what they eat. But there is some sort of happy medium in there in that do we glorify this particular situation to the point where we make it okay? Because sometimes when we make things okay, that takes some of the impetus for people to change.
Mm.
So I think, there is something called healthy shame, which is basically putting something out there that says, hey, this isn't healthy, which is what Jordan Peterson is doing. This isn't healthy. I don't know if we should be accepting this and lauding this as normal or the ideal or okay, because clearly it's not. So if you had somebody that said, I smoke 3 packs a day and I like myself, I like the fact that I'm a smoker, would you kind of say, well, we just need to accept the fact that this guy likes to smoke 3 packs a day? I mean, I don't see there's any point in shaming somebody about that, but there is some sort of way that society kind of guides itself. Now, I recognize the irony of talking about men being, shamed because they're crying, and then talking about shame in this other thing. But it's such a multifactorial thing, and it's such a powerful driver of this state of what I call alarm that drives anxiety in the first place is shame. And shame really comes from just non-acceptance and being able to see yourself and know, there's something I'd like to change, but I'm not going to change it by shaming. And it's like the old addiction thing. You're never going to get somebody off alcohol or off cocaine or whatever by shaming them about it. Never works.
No. It's also interesting too, like you mentioned, cigarettes. We all know that cigarettes are harmful and dangerous for us, but then we go, oh, too much sugar. Nah, we
Yeah.
can't stop people from doing that. Why would we do that? It's to me, it's like you've got one message that is changing, another message is also changing to suit this sort of mainstream medium. Everyone's trying to normalize stupidity, if you ask me. And then you've got
Yeah.
like an unhealthy version of shame that gets thrown into the mix too, which makes people go, "Oh, you're a hateful person." I'm like, "No,
Yes. Yeah.
I'm trying to help you. You don't
Yeah.
see it as help." But the fact is, you got a lot of people nowadays that hate the truth because it's like rather convincing for them. It shows them who they really are. Like they're seeing
Yeah.
truth. You know what I mean?
And I think it comes down to the fact that our society hates negative emotion.
Yeah.
So it's like rather than seeing the purpose of what negative emotion is, which is often to curb behavior, to sort of just allow it. It's like, well, or run away from the negative emotion. Rather than actually allow yourself to feel it and process it and go through it, we have to run from it. We have to do something that sort of escapes from it, which is a lot of what anxiety is this uncomfortable state of alarm that we want to run from. And what I was saying earlier, like a lot of anxiety is a disconnection of your adult self from your child self and from your mind and your body. So when the adult doesn't want to go back to the child because the child holds all their pain, and the child doesn't trust the adult because the adult's been there for decades and hasn't really gone back to help the child. So there's this ultimate separation between the adult self and the child self, which drives a tremendous amount of alarm. And then there's a tremendous amount of shame behind that because a lot of what separates the adult and the child is shame. And I'll give you an example. So if you're bullied when you're younger,
Mm.
right? There's a part of us that just feels so horrible about being bullied. As we get older and we grow out of, we grow out of school, we're not being bullied anymore. We don't really want to go back and visit that child who was bullied because it's just too damn painful. But that child is still carrying a tremendous amount of alarm.
Yeah.
So that separation just continues as we go through. And I think that's where getting back to men, going into men's groups where we start looking at the shame and saying, I felt the same way. I felt the same thing. Like connecting with men, other men in these groups that don't have women around or whatever. I think that's very healthy for men to have men's groups. But it's just one of those things that, the shame is there to kind of point you towards a pain point that needs addressing. And it's probably the child in you.
And I personally don't think saying that masculinity is inherently toxic for a young kid.
I don't either.
I don't think that's going to benefit them at all. I think it's just going to do more harm to the child and create more anxiety because they don't know what to do with it. If they've got like
Right.
this thought process, they're being told, hey, you are inherently toxic as a male,
Yep.
can't change that. Like, what am I going to do with that?
Yep.
It's an alarming piece of
Of course
information
it
to
is.
throw on a kid. It's just
Absolutely.
trying to
When
figure
there's no
themselves
way
out.
out. And
No,
there's the adults don't provide an answer to that either. So
no,
it's just this never-ending, roller coaster of pain that the child has to go through without any adults kind of supporting them. I
no.
mean, Professor Scott Galloway talks about, mentoring, like
Yeah.
older males mentoring younger males because it's just not happening anymore. And the younger males are falling off the map. Like if we saw people kill themselves at this rate, any group, there'd be huge amounts of intervention. But
Mm.
males just don't get any sympathy. And it's part of the expendable nature. It's part of our evolutionary dynamic for sure. Men are sent off to war. Men are expendable. It's just how things are. And it's an unfortunate, it's an unfortunate reality, but it's realizing that, okay, we have to, as men, start looking after each other. And unfortunately, we're raised in this environment of competition ever since we're boys.
Yeah.
So it's very hard when you're raised in this level of competition where you've got to appear strong and masculine. And then say you're going through a divorce and you're thinking about suicide. You're not going to mention this to your so-called competitor, even if he's your buddy, because unconsciously there is this, I have to keep up this image and I'm not going to appear weak. And the way a lot of men, well, maybe a few men, don't appear weak is they put a bullet in their head.
Mm.
That's
The,
what they do
the
first.
the rate of suicides here in Australia
Yep.
on the rise
Oh
at
yeah.
enormous levels.
Everywhere.
You don't hear anyone really talking about it, and people have
Everywhere.
like this aversion to it. It's like
Yep.
we cannot talk about it because it is such a sensitive topic. And I'm like, no, 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 you need to talk about it.
Yes.
Otherwise,
Yes.
how are you going to help those men that are truly struggling overcome it? Like, it's not, I would have loved someone to come up to me and start talking to me.
Yeah.
But the thing is, no one felt the need to, or everyone felt afraid to. And I'm going,
Yeah.
no, that's the
Yeah.
wrong that's the wrong way to go about this. We've got this massive issue in our society today. I get you may think that men are expendable, but what the hell are we going to do without men?
I know. I
Like,
see these,
we need
I see
men.
these, yeah, I see these YouTube things. It's like these women that I don't need a man. It's like, well, when your power goes out at 4 o'clock in the morning and it's in a deep, dark rainstorm, it's not the women that are going out to fix it, right? Like it's just you need men. That's just how this is how we're built is we fix stuff. We build stuff and we fix it. That's what we do. Women, traditionally they look after the relationships. We look after the structure and they look after the relationships. That's typically how society works. And now society is getting upended because men are now sort of being pulled into the relationship management role, and women are now going into, UFC, Ultimate Fighting. You see, Ronda Rousey was the highest paid MMA fighter, um, beating up other women.
Yeah.
It's like women are becoming men and men aren't so much becoming women so much, although it is happening a little bit. But it's much more that women see men as like they have everything. And then they get there, they see what it's like to work 80-hour weeks as a lawyer or whatever. And then at 32 they go, I don't want this. So a lot of women on social media now are getting, we're getting sold a bill of goods that we need a career, we need this. And it's often goes against the grain of who we are as people. At
Mm.
32, it's like, why am I working 80 hours a week to make partner? And then they wind up at 32 like quitting, and then they have a family, and it's just we're biologically programmed to do it this way. And the women are getting angry because we thought the women are like, well, we thought this was they don't say this overtly, but it's like we thought the men have it so good, and then they realized it's not so great to be a man.
Yeah.
There are some great things about it. No kidding, no questions. There are
Yeah.
some great things about it, but there's also some tremendously shitty things to do about it that are not great about being a man either.
One thing I love hearing is I am a strong, independent woman. I don't need
Yeah.
no man. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
by all means, I don't want you either.
Yeah. Well, that's why a lot of men in North America are going to like the Philippines to get their wives.
Yeah,
It's just like they want that traditional role anymore. They don't want a competitor. Some men do, but a lot of men are starting to go, why am I fighting so hard? And then also women are, I'm a 10, I deserve a 10, this kind of thing. And it's like the bar is raised so high for the average male that they feel like they can't compete, so they're not even bothering.
honestly, Russ, like the dating scene here in Australia, it's horrendous. Like
Yeah.
you've got all these apps now. Everyone's going on the app, and it's
Yeah.
become like
Hmm.
this massive hookup culture. No one
Yeah.
knows how to really commit anymore. Everyone's
Right.
afraid to commit, and then they don't really understand the full dynamics of how to navigate an actual relationship. And that women
Yeah.
think that if you go up to them and you start talking to them, I kid you not, Russ, like the women that I would
Yeah.
go up to in person and start
Yeah.
talking to them, within 5 seconds, I'm either being told to bugger off or they got a
Yeah.
boyfriend or something else. Like
Yeah.
you can't
Yeah.
even get to first base with many women here, which is just, hey, do you want to have a coffee? Let me get
Yeah.
to know you. Can't even do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, it's getting to the point where, our society survives on connection, and we're getting more and more disconnected, more and more judgmental, and more abandoning ourselves to try and be this ideal that we can never meet.
Yeah.
It's just not possible for the women and the men. It's not just the men. So it's kind of like, women are looking, I see these women on like Instagram who are gorgeous, beautiful, beautiful women, but you can always look on Instagram and find 25 women who are more gorgeous than you. Even for the sake of argument, they're nines out of 10, like brilliantly attractive women. But they can go online and see 25 10 out of 10s.
Mm,
So they get this idea that, okay, well, this is unattainable. It just social media is raising the bar so high and just tremendously involved in disconnecting us more and more. I mean, ironically, it was supposed to connect us, and it's
yeah.
just creating the exact opposite.
I mean, we're more wired than ever before. That's for
Yeah.
sure. Like we've definitely got this bandwidth that people can
Yeah.
actually, I guess, connect on some kind of level. I mean, I'm grateful for the fact that we get to Zoom because
Yeah.
without that, we wouldn't be able to really talk or connect. So there's that element. But then
Yeah.
there's the other element of we have become so disconnected that we can't actually speak to a person in real life because we can't deal with emotion. Like,
Because there's too much anxiety. That's the
yeah,
thing. Like social anxiety. Social anxiety is such a massive thing now because we have this thing in our minds and bodies called the social engagement system: eye contact, tone of voice, prosody of voice, body language, facial expression. But we're losing the ability to connect because a lot of our interactions are through a screen. They're not through
mm,
one-on-one. So when I was younger, all day we'd be out playing with our friends, playing road hockey, playing hide and seek, whatever it is. And when they fell, you would see the pain on their face. When they won, they scored the winning goal, you would see the joy, the elation on their face. We're not getting that maturing social engagement system anymore because the social engagement system is also what we use to soothe ourselves.
yeah,
So if we don't get face-to-face interaction when we're younger, we don't build our social engagement system. We don't build our social engagement system. We can't soothe other people. Empathy is dropping among our kids tremendously, but we can't soothe ourselves either. So anxiety is going through the roof.
have you read Jonathan Haidt's new book, The Anxious
I
Generation?
just started it.
Yeah, I think he was referring to that. What exactly what you were
Oh,
saying?
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
we know it,
digital screens. Yeah,
we
it's
know it,
screens.
but we
Yeah.
won't do anything about it because we're
Well,
afraid to do
it's
anything
so
about it.
powerful. Yeah,
Yeah,
the dopaminergic kick, is so powerful from social media. Like the thing is, you can go on Instagram and you can go to Thailand, then you can go to Bangkok, then you can go to, I mean, I guess Bangkok's in Thailand, or you can go to Australia. Or then you can see a beautiful waterfall. Then you can see someone do a high dive, like three falls from 150 feet. You can see all this in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Like no human being is going to be able to compete with that level of sort of dopaminergic overdose. Like it just no human being is going to be able to compete with that. So of course we're going to be more. And Japan is probably the sort of harbinger of this. So we see these. I saw this thing about 6 months ago about these men. There's like 8 of them. They're all like early 20s and they all have girlfriends, but their girlfriends are all on their phones and
Yeah.
they're not real women. They're basically their AI
AI.
girlfriends. So they go out to these things and they go out to these little pubs where they sit with each other. They don't even talk to each other. They have these little AI girlfriends on their phone beside them. And it's like that's where we're going.
Major sense of loneliness. I think it's South Korea. Their birth rates have declined enormously, and
Japan too.
Japan. And I think the
Yeah.
government wants to pay people to actually have kids now. And I'm
Yeah.
going, that, like, you look at that and you're going, that's concerning. Like, you're getting this massive incentive to have, but fact is, women just want to sleep around. They don't want to have kids anymore because there's another level of commitment they don't want to have to deal with.
Right.
And then the men, they're also going, well, that's great. I don't have to commit to anyone. I can just,
Right.
sleep around and have no consequences whatsoever. So that's
Yeah.
another horrible messaging. The family unit has been dismantled along with it. So, like, is it any wonder?
Well, that's true in Japan too, because basically the young people kind of see their parents. So their dad works 80 plus hours a week. Their mom is at home alone most of the time or taking care of the kids, looking after the household, and they go, "Do I want this?
Yeah.
Is this what I want to do? I want to get married and have this exact same thing play out?" And they go, "No." So they hang out in these sort of amorphous groups of 12 to 20 of them, and they hook up every once in a while and that kind of stuff. But they move in these big clumps, but the clumps don't have children.
No, no. I think if we don't do something about it, society's going to be it's already in a bad shape.
It's already in a
It's going to
bad
be,
shape.
so going to be in an even
Yeah.
worse shape, I reckon. That is,
Well,
unless,
the thing about human beings is they don't do anything until the pain of not doing something gets too great.
yeah, or it's too
So,
late.
yeah, or yeah, that's the nihilistic view of it for sure.
Yeah,
So I think it's just like, okay, what's it going to take until we start seeing like this is not sustainable? So it's either we're going to be able to see that and do something about it, or we're just going to keep like lemmings go off the cliff, and that's going to be the end. I don't know which way it's going to go.
yeah. Well, I'm grateful for people like you, Russ, that actually know all this stuff and are warning people first and foremost, and secondly, you're actually giving people helpful tools and strategies to take with you, and which leads me to your next book. So
Right.
you've got Anxiety RX, I guess is version 2.2,
2.0. Yeah.
2.0.
So I just found, I found this out when I published the first book called Anxiety RX. So in North America, RX means prescription. But in other countries, I didn't know this. And if I knew this, I wouldn't have named the book Anxiety RX. So the new version of the book that goes out worldwide is going to be called The Anxiety Prescription. But
Oh,
in North America, it will still be called Anxiety RX because in North America, RX means prescription. RX is actually written on the top of most prescription pads for doctors. Little R
I
and
didn't know that.
the initial meaning was recipe. That's what it was. Like RX was supposed to be recipe because back in the days the doctors were, tinctures of iodine and all that kind of stuff. It was a recipe. So, but I didn't know that RX didn't mean prescription all over the world. So we had to change the name for the second book to The Anxiety Prescription. So it makes sense for people that don't know what RX means. Because across North America, of course, everyone knows that RX means prescription, but everywhere else they don't. So that was a funny thing when I found that out.
I just learned something then.
Yeah.
So what do you want
Well,
people?
what did you think? What did you think when the book was called Anxiety RX? Did you think I just put RX up there for like what did you think the RX meant?
I thought it's some psychological term, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't know it was a prescription sort of thing, but now that
Yeah.
I do, it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But what do you want people to take away from reading the book?
Yeah, I want them to get some really practical tools. The first book was a lot about my own journey with, anxiety and how it made me feel suicidal and just how it evolved. And the first book was a lot more like of a memoir. It was a lot more sort of storytelling and that kind of stuff too. There's a lot of stories in the second book too, but it's really the second book is so much more practical. It's so much more, oh, okay, this is what you're doing. This is how you stop doing that. This is the thoughts that you're getting into. This is how you change that into something that's actually more helpful for you. So the second one is a lot more practical, I would say, than the first one. And there's less storytelling. Of course, there's stories all the way through it because I think that's how we learn is through stories and that kind of thing, but it's a lot more practical. And I've been on like 250 podcasts in the last 4 years since the first book came out. So I've refined the message so much. The concepts are still exactly the same. It's just I've refined the examples, I've refined the way people can absorb the information just so much easier. Not that there was a lot of jargon in the first one, but it's really sort of point by point. Like this is how you got anxiety, and then this is how you get out. That's basically what the second book's about.
Well, I'm excited for it. I'm always excited to see what you do, my friend. And
Yeah, thanks,
I'm
Jay.
I'm going to let people know exactly where they can get a copy of it. Links will be in the show description. But I'm also keen to see you on the Diary of a CEO soon. So
I'd love to be on that show.
yeah,
Yeah, I would love to be on that show. And
if
I
anyone
think,
can get on there, it's you, man.
I would love it. I would love it for sure. And I appreciate your endorsement. I've always appreciated your support. I've tried to support you too. Congratulations on running your fourth marathon. And I guess you've got another one coming up soon. You're a
Yeah,
machine, dude.
4 weeks time or something
Good
along
for
those
you.
lines. I did the first one or the one in July. I did that injured, had
Yeah.
ITB and a Baker's
Yeah.
cyst. And I'm just like, screw it, I'm gonna do it. Did a sub 3 hour with that one. Um, and then the last one I did, Sunny Coast, wasn't exactly the best because my legs were so damn tired. So now I'm leaving the hardest one till last.
There you go. We'll start calling you Jay Goggins.
I won't won't deny that at all. I think I'll
Okay,
accept it.
good.
I'll love it. But
It's great seeing you again, man. It's great
likewise,
talking to
man.
you.
Likewise, as always.